I did not cry. I did not beg. I sat across from my mother-in-law in that conference room, with my hands folded on the table, my breathing steady, my face completely still. She was talking. Her lawyer was talking. My father-in-law was nodding along like he always did. That slow, deliberate nod that meant he had already decided something and nothing in the world was going to change it. I let them talk, because I already knew how this was going to end. My name is Clara. I was 31 years old when my husband died. And I was 32 when his family decided that losing him wasn't enough, they were going to take everything else too. Let me tell you how we got here, because you need to understand what kind of people we're dealing with. I met my husband at work. He was a structural engineer. I was a financial analyst at the same firm, different department, and we met in the elevator on a Tuesday in October, and he asked me if I'd ever tried the Thai place 2 blocks down, because he'd been going there every Wednesday for 3 years, and he was starting to think he needed a witness to confirm it was as good as he thought it was. I went. It was. We got married 18 months later. His family did not come to the wedding. That's not a figure of speech. My mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and his older sister, none of them came. Not because they weren't invited. They were. They declined because, in my mother-in-law's exact words, which she said to my husband's face in my presence, I was not the kind of woman they had in mind for him. I was too independent, too career-focused, too unwilling, I think was the actual word she used, to understand my place in a family like theirs. I remember the way my husband looked at her when she said that. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, very calmly, if that's how you feel, then we'll be fine without you there. And we were. We had our wedding with my family, a few of his cousins who actually liked him as a person, and our friends. It was small and genuine, and I have never once wished it had been any different. The problem is, what happened after. His family did not disappear. That would have been too simple. Instead, they orbited. They called every few months, always with something. They needed money for his sister's business that kept failing, a cosign on a loan, an introduction to someone I knew professionally, my husband. Because he was fundamentally a decent person, who loved his parents despite everything, always tried to help. Not always successfully, not always wisely. His mother never once called me by my name. In 4 years of marriage, she called me her or your wife, or, when she was feeling particularly generous, the girl. She sent Christmas gifts addressed only to her son. She referred to our apartment as his place. She behaved, in every possible way, as if I were a temporary inconvenience in her son's life, rather than the person he had chosen to build that life with. I smiled. I was polite. I showed up to the family dinners we occasionally attended with a dish I'd cooked from scratch, and I complimented her house, and I watched my husband try to bridge a gap that she had no intention of closing. I also, because I am a financial analyst who has spent her entire career reading documents other people don't bother to read, paid very close attention to everything. My husband died 14 months ago. A car accident on a Wednesday morning, which is the kind of detail that doesn't mean anything, and also means everything. Because Wednesdays were our Thai food day, and he had texted me 20 minutes before it happened to ask if I wanted the usual. I said yes. He never made it there. The grief is its own country. I won't try to describe it in a way that does it justice. Because I can't. I will only say that I spent the first 3 months barely functional, and the following months learning, slowly, what it meant to keep living when the person you built your life around was no longer in it. His family arrived at the funeral with an agenda. I know that sounds uncharitable. Maybe I should give them the benefit of the doubt and say they were grieving too, which they were, and that grief makes people behave in ways they wouldn't otherwise. But I watched my mother-in-law at the reception after the burial, and what I saw in her face wasn't grief. It was calculation. She was looking around our house, the house my husband and I had bought together 3 years ago, the house we'd renovated together, where we'd painted the kitchen cabinets ourselves over 2 weekends and hung the wrong curtains in the bedroom twice before getting it right, and she was assessing it. She came to me 2 weeks after the funeral. She sat in my kitchen, accepted the coffee I made, and told me, in the gentlest possible tone, that she and my father-in-law had been talking, and they felt it would be best if I moved out of the house so that my husband's assets could be properly evaluated as part of his estate. I asked her to repeat what she'd just said. She repeated it. I said, very carefully, this is my house too. My name is on the deed. I've been paying the mortgage for 4 years. She looked at me like I'd said something naive. She said she understood I might feel that way, but the family had certain rights, and they had spoken to a lawyer, and they believed that as his parents, they were entitled to a portion of what he'd left behind. She said what he'd left behind like I wasn't sitting right in front of her. I did not scream. I did not throw her out. I said I would need to speak with my own attorney, and I thanked her for the conversation, and I walked her to the door. Then I sat alone in my kitchen for a very long time. Here's the thing about working in finance for 8 years. You develop a very specific relationship with paperwork. You learn that documents tell stories that people don't intend to tell. You learn that what's written matters infinitely more than what's said. And you learn that the people who cause the most damage are almost always the ones who assume no one is paying close enough attention to notice. My mother-in-law assumed I was too deep in grief to pay attention. She was wrong. I called my attorney, not a new one. My attorney. A woman I'd worked with for years on professional matters, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I appreciate most about her. Then she said, "Send me everything you have. Every document, every account statement, every piece of paper, with either of your names on it." I sent her everything. While I was pulling the files together, I found something. My husband had been meticulous about paperwork. It was one of the things we had in common. We were both the kind of people who kept records, who filed things properly, who believed that documentation was a form of respect for the future. Going through his files was like walking through a very organized version of our shared history. The mortgage documents, the insurance policies, the retirement accounts, which had named me as the sole beneficiary when we got engaged and which I was well aware of. And then, tucked inside a folder labeled simply, Mom, I found a series of wire transfer confirmations. Over the course of 3 years, my husband had transferred money to his mother's personal bank account. The total was not small, and next to each transfer, in his handwriting, was a note about what it was for: his sister's business, his father's medical bills, a loan that was never repaid, a down payment on something I'd never heard of. That wasn't the surprising part. The surprising part was the email thread I found attached to the most recent transfer. His mother had sent him a message 8 months before he died, asking for another payment. And in the thread, which he had apparently printed and saved, which told me he knew this might matter someday, she had written, among other things, "You know your wife would never understand this. Don't tell her. This is family business, not hers." He had replied, "I understand. I'll handle it." I sat with that document for a long time, not because it hurt, although it did hurt in a complicated way I'm still working through, but because I understood, in that moment, exactly what kind of person my mother-in-law was. She had spent 4 years convincing my husband that his family's financial problems were a secret he needed to keep from his own wife. She had built a parallel relationship with him that existed specifically in the space she'd created by making me feel unwelcome. And now that he was gone, she intended to collect on that relationship by taking the assets that were legally, unambiguously mine. I forwarded the email thread to my attorney. She called me within the hour. She said, "Clara, I think we need to talk about some additional aspects of this situation." I said, "I think so too." The lawsuit arrived 6 weeks later. My in-laws, represented by an attorney I'd never heard of but who had apparently handled several estate disputes in our county, filed a claim asserting that a significant portion of my husband's estate, including equity in the house and a portion of his investment accounts, should be redirected to them as his surviving parents. Their argument rested on several things: the money he had given them over the years, which they were now characterizing as an informal loan that should be repaid from the estate, an alleged verbal agreement my husband had supposedly made about supporting them in their later years, and, most interestingly, a claim that I had unduly influenced my husband's financial decisions during our marriage in a way that had disadvantaged his family. That last part made my attorney laugh, not unkindly, when she read it. She called it ambitious. What my in-laws did not know, could not have known, because my husband had never told them, and I had never had any reason to bring it up, was that 2 months before his death, my husband had updated several key documents. He had done it quietly, with a different attorney, without telling anyone. He had sent me a text the day he signed everything that just said, "Paperwork done. Everything is the way it should be." I'd asked him what he meant, and he said he'd explain over dinner, and then we got busy, and the conversation drifted, and then 14 months ago, it became one of the many conversations we would never finish. After he died, I had found the documents. I had read them. I had understood what he'd done, and why, and I had put them somewhere very safe. I did not mention them to my mother-in-law when she came for coffee. I did not mention them to the opposing attorney when they filed the lawsuit. I waited, because there is a particular kind of satisfaction in letting someone believe they are about to win before you show them the board they've been playing on this entire time. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning. My mother-in-law arrived with her husband and her attorney, and the quiet, settled confidence of someone who has never once considered that they might be wrong. She sat across from me at the conference table and looked at a point just past my shoulder, the way she always did, as if direct eye contact would constitute acknowledgement of my existence. Her attorney laid out their case. It was polished, and it was detailed, and it was entirely built on a foundation of what they believed they knew. When he finished, my attorney said, "Thank you. May I share our response?" My mother-in-law's attorney nodded. My attorney opened her folder. She began with the basics: the house deed, which had both our names on it from the day we bought it, and which under state law transferred entirely to me as the surviving spouse; the retirement accounts and life insurance, which named me as sole beneficiary and which, under federal law, passed directly to me outside of probate entirely, regardless of what anyone else believed they were owed; the investment accounts, similarly structured. Then she moved to the money. She placed the wire transfer confirmations on the table. All of them. 3 years' worth. My mother-in-law looked at them and didn't flinch, which told me she'd already anticipated this. Her attorney said these transfers demonstrated the family relationship and the informal financial support arrangement they were referencing in their claim. My attorney said, "Yes, we thought you might characterize them that way. That's why we pulled the tax records." My mother-in-law's attorney paused. My attorney explained, very calmly, that the transfers had never been documented as loans. There were no promissory notes, no repayment schedules, no acknowledgement in any tax filing on either side that money had been lent and was expected to be returned. Under the law, undocumented transfers between family members, absent written evidence of a loan agreement, are treated as gifts. They cannot be reclaimed from an estate. Then my attorney placed the email on the table. The one where my mother-in-law had told my husband not to tell me. The one he had printed and saved. The room got very quiet. My attorney explained that we were not raising this to be vindictive, but to establish a pattern of financial requests made outside the knowledge of my husband's spouse. A pattern that, in combination with the lawsuit's claim that I had unduly influenced his financial decisions, raised questions about who had actually been exerting influence over my husband's choices during our marriage, and in whose interests. My mother-in-law's face did something complicated. She looked at her husband. Her husband was studying the table. Her attorney asked for a brief recess. My attorney said, "Of course. Take all the time you need." During the recess, I stood by the window and looked at the street below, and thought about my husband printing that email, and filing it in a folder labeled with his mother's name. I thought about what that meant, that he had seen it coming. Somehow. Even then. That he had known his family well enough to keep records. That even at the end, he was trying to protect me in the ways he could. I did not let myself cry. There would be time for that later, privately, in the way I'd learned to do most of my grief in pieces. Alone. In the early morning before the world started its noise again. When everyone came back to the table, the tone had shifted. My mother-in-law's attorney said they were prepared to discuss a modified settlement arrangement. He was careful with his words in a way he hadn't been before. He talked about the family's grief, about the difficulty of the situation, about a desire to resolve things without further conflict. My attorney said that was appreciated. She then placed one more document on the table. It was the updated will, the one my husband had signed 2 months before he died. My mother-in-law's attorney read it. Then he read it again. I watched him read it twice, and I watched the shape of his posture change between the first reading and the second. The will was explicit. It had been drafted, my attorney explained, by a separate estate attorney my husband had engaged independently, with no involvement from me. It confirmed that all assets, the house, the accounts, the personal property, were to pass to me, without condition. It included a specific notation that my husband had considered the financial support he'd provided to his family over the years to constitute fulfillment of any moral or familial obligation he felt he owed them, and that no further claims on his estate by any family member were anticipated or intended. There was also a letter, a personal letter, written by my husband, attached to the will as an exhibit. My attorney had not read it aloud. She had simply placed it face up on the table. My mother-in-law's eyes went to it. My attorney said, "You're welcome to read it. He addressed it to you." My mother-in-law reached out and picked up the letter. She read it. Her husband leaned over and read it with her. I don't know exactly what it said. My husband had chosen not to share it with me, and I had honored that choice, even after I found it, because some things are between a person and their mother regardless of everything else. Whatever it said, by the time she finished reading it, my mother-in-law was holding the paper with both hands and looking at it without speaking. Her attorney quietly gathered his papers. He said he needed to confer with his clients privately and would be in touch. The mediation ended 40 minutes after it began. My attorney and I walked to her car together. It was a cold morning, the kind where the air is very clear and everything looks slightly more itself than usual. She said she thought we'd hear from them within the week, and that when we did, it would not be a continuation of the lawsuit. She was right. They withdrew the claim 4 days later. But here's the part that surprised even me. A month after the withdrawal, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman who introduced herself as a financial crimes investigator with a state agency. She said they'd become aware of certain transactions, and that my name had come up in the course of their review. She asked if I'd be willing to speak with them. I called my attorney immediately. What emerged over the following weeks, in pieces, was something I had not fully anticipated. The money my husband had sent his family over the years, the amounts I had thought were simply misguided generosity, had in some cases been obtained under false pretenses. His sister had told him, on at least 2 occasions, that the money was needed to pay employees who hadn't been paid, to avoid a labor complaint. Documentation obtained during the agency's review showed no such employees had existed. The invoices she'd provided my husband were fabricated. My mother-in-law had known. The email I'd found, the one telling my husband not to tell me, was part of a larger chain that the investigators were now reviewing, in the context of what appeared to be a coordinated effort to obtain money through misrepresentation. I did not file a complaint. I didn't have to. Once the investigators had what they needed, the process moved without me. I won't tell you the legal outcome for them because it's still ongoing, and my attorney has asked me to be careful about what I say publicly. What I will tell you is that they are no longer pursuing anything from me, in any form, and that the calls, the ones that used to come every few months asking for help with one thing or another, have stopped entirely. I still live in my house. I painted the living room last spring, a color my husband and I had picked out together and never gotten around to using. It took me 2 days, and I did it by myself with music on and the windows open. And when I finished, I stood in the middle of the room and looked at the walls and felt something I can only describe as both sad and correct at the same time. I've been asked, by a few people who know the full story, if I feel guilty, if I wish I'd handled it differently, if there's any part of me that wanted to give them something just to make it go away. No. The answer is no. Here's what I've learned. Being kind does not mean being without limits. Being someone who avoids conflict does not mean you have no capacity for it. And the most powerful position you can ever be in is the one where you've done the work, kept the records, and know exactly what's in every folder before anyone else knows to look. My mother-in-law called me the girl for 4 years because she believed I was someone who could be overlooked. She wasn't the first person to make that mistake. She was just the last one who got to make it at my expense. I still go to the Thai place. Not every Wednesday, that took a while to be able to do again. But I go. I sit at the same table we always used. I order the usual. And I stay for a while, because I've learned not to rush through the things that matter, and because some habits are worth keeping, even after the person who started them is gone. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to be on your side, leave me a comment. Tell me what you did with it. I'd really like to know.